A2-2017. City of Grand Forks zoning bylaw number 2039-2017 and repeal of the City Grand Forks zoning bylaw 1606. At this hearing, any person present who believes that his or her interest in the properties within the boundaries of the city is affected by the proposed bylaws shall be given the opportunity to be heard on matters contained in the bylaw. However, it is important that all who speak at this hearing restrict their remarks to matters contained in the bylaws, and it is my responsibility as the chair of this meeting to ensure that all the remarks are so restricted. Those of you who wish to speak concerning these proposed bylaws should, at the appropriate time, commence your address to council and meeting by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaws. Members of council may, if they so wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. However, the main function of the council members this evening is to listen to the views of the public. It is not the function of council at this hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaws with individual citizens or with each other. Everyone who deems his or her interest in land subject to these bylaws to be affected shall be given the opportunity to be heard at this hearing. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making their views known. After this hearing is concluded, the council may, without further notice, give whatever effect council deems proper to the representations made at this hearing. During a public hearing, people sometimes become enthusiastic or emotional. Regardless of whether you favor or oppose any argument, please refrain from applause or other expressions of emotion. Restraint enables others whose views may or may not coincide with your own to exercise their right to express their views and have them heard in as an impartial a forum as possible. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Now let us proceed with the hearing. Does anyone here wish to speak?
Can we, John Mackay, 7304 Riverside Drive. Can we have an expansion on these bylaws so we know what we're talking about? I mean, you've just read off the numbers of bylaws. What are they? And I have a question over my head.
Your worship, the bylaws, I believe, are attached to the agenda. There's anything in particular that the members of the public, but they are attached as far as the agendas go, I believe. And perhaps the senior planner might want to speak to this as well.
Sure.
Through the mayor, thank you. I'm not going to speak to content except just to process here. So these bylaws were introduced in a meeting in initially June, and then there's a public workshop in July, and then 2 readings, first and second reading in the previous month, as well as an open house. So the process has been advertised and brought before the public. The main thrust of the changes is some policy changes in the official community plan that makes it easier for council to support affordable housing and supports reducing barriers to affordable housing in the zoning bylaw. And there's a series of changes in the zoning bylaw that enable essentially detached and small housing, so garden suites and that kind of thing. So that's the main thrust of the changes. But there's been ample opportunity for reviewing and advertisement, and the process is to hear from the public and go from here. Thank you.
Thank you. I missed the other ones.
No, we came to one.
Thank you.
There's 2 written sheets. Just read those in.
Well, you have the gentleman in the third row. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Dave Skelton. My address is 7491 11th Street. And I have reviewed particularly the bylaw amendment document, although I'm certainly not well versed on what it all means, having not really had much experience in this. However, I do have some input that I gave to Graham Watt and Dave Bruce. It's only a 2-page document about our feelings on the document. Well, I'm glad you saw that, and I guess I'm glad you have that, and I guess I'm just hopeful that whoever is making the decisions on this bylaw has an opportunity to read that document around my input and my neighbors, two of my neighbors who are with me today, on how it might impact us on our special little street. Of course, everyone's special little street is going to be impacted. So I'm happy to see the document is available for decision makers, and I'm sure that with Graham and Dave, they'll address some of my questions in that 2-page document. But I guess overall, there's a sense that we can't turn back the clock, and I don't want to live in a pull up the rope mentality where I'm here and now no one else can come. But we have 2 empty lots on either side of us, actually, on 11th Street. So this bylaw is definitely going to impact us, and I just want to make sure that the future is as good as it could be for all of the stakeholders, given the changes to the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well.
Yeah, Harry Mason, 7522 11th Street. I think probably my main concern would be the bylaw concerning carriage houses, or I forget the term that was exactly used. Small houses, affordable housing, but carriage house is the one I'm familiar with. So if we could have some input on that.
What?
2 questions, sir. Sorry. Could you please repeat the question? I was writing down the first part of it.
Some information as regard to carriage houses, or whatever the term is used in the bylaw.
Sure.
Garden houses, pardon me.
Garden houses, garden suites. So detached, smaller than the principal dwelling, shorter in stature, and subordinate to, so behind. That's essentially the essence of it. The overall controls on the amount of lot coverage are actually strengthened in the zoning bylaw by requiring the parking requirements of the lot to also be met within the overall space. So density, overall coverage of the lot limits the amount of density and keeps open space as a primary value. Essentially, though, enabling a laneway house or a garden suite is allowed, subject to a few configuration issues. And this is in R1, not R1A, but in the other residential zones.
Like, for instance, a garden suite. Can you give me an idea how large that might be, or how small that might be?
Anywhere from 12 square meters to 90 square meters, and in metric and English, sorry.
Yeah, that would help.
That's from about 125 square feet to under 900 square feet, or just over 900 square feet.
125 square to 900 square.
Yeah. depending on the size of the principal residence, there's a constraint at 75% of the floor area.
Or the lot that it's going on, perhaps. eh?
Exactly.
If I may, just say, we're looking to you for information and for what you think about all of this. And so this is the time that we're hoping that we can get your observations about these potential changes. But it seems like you've possibly come to receive information that maybe you haven't quite yet understood or digested. So maybe we've got a bit of a disconnect happening.
Yeah, like if I'm reading that screen up there, it's very difficult
Exactly, right.
for me to read.
So maybe just to facilitate a more informative process, maybe Mr. Watt or someone else could just go again just through the essential differences in the two, so that people can understand how this will be affecting the plan.
A recap.
Yeah.
We can get rid of the bookmark and increase that size by 100%.
How's that?
That's better, yeah. I guess my eyes just aren't really good.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I might, I just wanted to reiterate, I don't know if everyone understands the process, but council has to be really careful not to offer our own opinions to you or to enter into debate on the subject. That's why we're all being so quiet.
Yeah.
We're here just to receive, and if we do that, then we compromise the process and it can get complicated.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
While I'm still, do I have to reintroduce myself here? While I'm still talking, the sizes of these garden houses, or whatever they're called, whatever the size, they're still going to have the services installed as per whether it's a full-size house or not, correct? Sewer and water?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the buildings will have to meet code, and they'll have to meet all of our bylaws
Right.
as well. Yeah, you bet.
What I'm getting at is somebody's going to put a 125 square foot home on a lot and then spend $30,000 for services. It would take a long time to get their money back, wouldn't it?
I guess one of the questions I have is, if the bylaw is approved, what changes occur as far as existing neighborhoods being informed that someone is taking action on lots on their block, and because of the rezoning, that we would have an opportunity to have some input on the appearance, the aesthetics, the architecture, maybe even where the windows are placed, so that we have a heads up and can maybe work with all the stakeholders or be part of the stakeholder, so that we're just not caught blindsided that the truck pulls up one day and starts digging.
Or it drops off a trailer.
Or drops off a trailer. So I guess I'm curious as to whether that's part of the process, that neighbors are informed there's some activity in their neighborhood.
How would that process take place? Notice in the paper or what?
I guess I haven't done my homework, but I don't know where these 3 lots are that you're talking about.
Anybody?
So right now, it seems that these gentlemen,
Somebody else has the chair right now. Before. You have to just wait your turn, sir.
I'm sorry?
You have to wait your turn.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Somebody else
thought
is
he'd finished.
speaking.
I beg your pardon.
Were you getting a response for the gentleman that asked the question?
So, Mr. Mayor, thank you. So we've noted the desire for the opportunity to have some insight, have some notice or notification and input into the design process. I think we can't speak yet to the exact development permit requirements or other approaches, but we've noted the opportunity to be involved in that. There's a wish for participation in that process and support
Okay.
that process.
Good.
Councilor Butler.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to our planner, just for clarification, it's my understanding that if somebody wants to build in the neighborhood, as long as they meet the zoning requirements, there is no public notification.
There isn't.
Pardon me?
Building permits are posted.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when are the building permits posted?
Sorry, the building inspector's not here, but I would assume once they have their building
Yeah,
permit, they have to post it.
Exactly.
Or as soon as they start work? You might
It's
know.
usually once they're issued.
Yeah,
They're
once it's
normally
issued, they
posted
have to
because
post it.
that's the same procedure in every municipality, including Kelowna and everywhere.
Yeah, so there's nothing stopping anybody from, if they're building a home and it fits in the zoning requirements and there's no development variance permit required, there is no public process necessary for design or form of character or anything, unless it's in the development permit area.
Or unless it requires rezoning or something. Yeah.
So just to be clear then, if this bylaw is passed, it just happens. We will get a garden suite or something built on
As
a
long
lot
as there's
beside us.
conformity, as long as there's conformity to the bylaw.
I'll speak a little bit more to this. Sorry. It's right up here in. It's not in the zoning bylaw itself. It's in the official community plan, and there's a development permit area. And so the way development permits work is that there's a special process where it's beyond just a building permit, where there's what's called form and character requirements, where usually what happens is that it comes to council. Neighboring notifications are given to neighbors as part of the development permit. And what the department's proposed is that at least at first that they go through council. Now, in studying what other municipalities have done and talked with their planners, usually that lasts until people are familiar with the process and comfortable with the designs. Nelson in particular is working to have pre-approved building designs, a package of them so people can select and go straight to building permit if they pick a pre-approved design. So what we've established here is some basic form and character requiring a development permit so that it does get council oversight, and then that can be changed once people are more familiar with how they look and what the process is.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you. I believe through you, your worship, to staff, there are copies of the agenda that include the bylaws and a recap, I think, that of the changes for anyone in the gallery that would like to pick one of those up. Might make it easier for you to understand maybe ask the questions.
Gentleman in the back row.
Ray Hanson, 1841 78th Avenue. I had the opportunity to pick up the package this morning and had a pretty good read of it this afternoon. And I guess my overall comment would be it's a good start in the right direction of affordable housing, and I would commend the staff for the work they've done on it.
Thank you, Mr.
There's
Hanson.
always going to be a few things that need to be ironed out as you go along and introduce these new things. But hopefully that can all happen.
Yeah. Tweaking is always easier. It's the initial project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Gentleman in the second row, I believe.
Yeah, hi, Ralph Beer, 1484 72nd Avenue. Not everybody has an alley behind their house, so I'm presuming that this, the approval for such second residence, am I not, is that correct? Is this like having a suite that's not a suite, that is a separate building? Okay, that's what it is. Down in Surrey, there's a lot of this, where there's laneway houses, and basically it's a carriage house. So you build a garage, you put a second story on the garage, and you have a suite up there. That's the idea here, right?
That's one option.
One option, yes, okay.
It doesn't need to be the garage.
Okay, yeah, because having a second residence on any of our, in our city, unless it's grandfathered, was like an absolute no-no. You couldn't just plop a mobile home in your backyard and rent it out. So I just wanted to clarify that this is what we're talking about here, is having a second residence as long as it meets certain criteria, right? Okay, so if your lot's big enough, you can do it.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Mary O'Neill, I've seen some of these in Vancouver in Point Grey carriage houses, and they look really nice. And I think the reason they look nice is because they're the siding on the carriage house matches the siding on the big house. Is there any kind of allowance or encouragement for that?
So, just this is one of the criteria in the development permit area. Should be clad with durable, aesthetically acceptable, and environmentally friendly materials, at least as good of quality as primary dwelling.
So does that eliminate trailers, mobile homes from being put in place?
Right now, mobile homes, the Z240 MH mobile home is only allowed in rural residential properties.
Oh, okay. Oh, so then next, what about tiny homes? Which are in fact a mobile home, right? Tiny houses?
This is an area of considerable discussion, and through much feedback, the changes introduced here don't allow tiny homes by default on residential lots, but through temporary use permit, if they're built according to certain standards, they would be allowed, and then placed on a foundation as converted to a garden suite. So tiny homes on wheels, so tiny homes on wheels would be allowed through a temporary use permit at first, except for industrial areas where there might be watch persons' quarters. So the principal change in there since the council last reviewed this is that enabling them by default across all zones was seen to be kind of too much out of the gate, and having some controls on it coming through council about where and how they're placed. They're not seen as a really desirable long-term solution. They're kind of a temporary in nature, and we would like to see more people settling down.
Yes, if I could just get a clarification on that. Was there a time frame on how long that mobile home could sit there before it had a foundation?
The tiny house on wheels, a temporary use permit is 3 years renewable. This is standard.
Not renewable.
Not renewable?
Not renewable, sorry. The manager clarified that, thank you.
And second roll, please.
Michelle Millette, 73208 8th Street. I'm curious about the term cluster home, so I also read some of the information, and I didn't, or I think that's what it was called, and I don't know what cluster homes are.
Yeah, I could use a picture here. We'll just take 1 second.
I guess I could have done that.
So this is an example of what's called a pocket neighborhood. The idea is that instead of having a row house or something, a multifamily residential could be detached small houses sharing a common lot. So this is an example from, I believe, Portland or Seattle. They're becoming more common where a large lot has shared amenities and shared garden space and is closer than typically on a normal single-family lot. There's many different good examples of clustered, and they're clustered together in order to save space and share amenities, and then they put all their parking off to one side usually.
Are they strata or single?
There's strata, there's cooperative. Generally, these ones are some kind of strata or cooperative because it's one large lot.
Okay, thank you. I like that. I think that's an interesting and innovative use of some of the larger lots.
Gentleman in the back.
Les Johnson, 8164 North Fork. You were saying that Nelson is one community that has some pre-approved designs that people can use without having to actually then go through the whole zone application or development process, etc. And listening to the gentleman here earlier on asking about asking questions leading into that, I'm just curious, in your research, communities that have gone this route that don't have pre-approved designs, do they end up with neighbors, taking neighbors to task in council to say, not in my neighbor's backyard, I don't like what they're doing? I mean, I'm just curious if that happens, and how do you head that off without having pre-approved designs?
So I hear the concern that there could be some neighborly conflict, around neighborly conflict. In the municipalities that have started with either a council approval process or a development permit approval process, they usually remove that after several months because they're finding that it holds things up too much. And once people get used to the idea, there's no more concerns. So Victoria has now removed the rezoning requirement, and it's now an over-the-counter staff approval prior to a building permit being issued.
Just a clarification on cluster housing, it's also can be used if you have a lot that is maybe only half usable. So you have a lot that has maybe some wetlands or something on it, then we could allow some other configuration, so you can still get the same density, but then you would allow an area for green space or something like that as well. So it enables to get those densities on those properties that maybe you wouldn't normally be able to get those densities on.
Muriel Neal, I live in South Buckle, and there's no sewer there. We are all on septic. So does that cancel out? I mean, because it's hard to get enough, you have to have a big lot to have septic.
The same development constraints that apply to subdivisions and would also apply to here. If there was an alternative solution proposed by either an engineer or a qualified wastewater system designer, it could be discussed. But the key is if there isn't enough room for the dispersal field for the existing house to be replaced, it might mean that a garden suite might not go on this time.
And it is interesting because the lots in South Ruckle are big. So there's your obvious place to densify.
But it would still be based on code, number of bedrooms. So no matter how many dwellings you have, it's still based on the code.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
And that basically would fall under the jurisdiction of IH in any event. It has nothing to do with municipality if it's a septic system.
So,
gentleman in the back, sorry.
So the last question just got me thinking. So right now, let's say you were to have somebody put in, let's say you went to the point of having cluster housing permitted, and one of these bigger lots decides that they want to put 4 things on there rather than 1. There used to be 1, so there was 1 water line going in with a 1 meter on it. And if they're connected to the sewer system, there's 1 sewer line coming out, being fed by 1 item now. There's 1 electrical meter because there's 1 place. You replace that with 4. Is that going to come from the city's point of view, 4 different meters for the electricity, 4 different meters for the water? Or is that going to be a shared expense? How's that going to be dealt with?
It's going to be depending on how it's organized, right? If it's strata, it's 1.
Through the mayor, thank you. That's the first place, depending on the ownership model. And if it's strata or if it's simply a rental suite, it's always through the same service. So if it's it depends on the ownership, but essentially the bylaws speak to sharing from the same service. So you hook into the primary homes, sewer line and water line and bill. Sometimes alternative solutions might need to be created. Sorry?
It's also with a subdivision.
Yes.
One of the problems that other communities have experienced is that once this starts happening is then suddenly people want to start subdividing off their garden suites and their secondary suites. So we want to make sure that's not going to happen, and so part of that is by ensuring that the secondary suite is serviced by the main service, and they're not going to be serviced by a separate service, so that is not going to be a concern, because it has been a problem in other communities where that's where it's gone, so we're safeguarding that.
I don't want to belabor this point to death, but so in a situation like that where now you've cluster housed a place and one particular building has the utilities running into it and it all branches off of that, 2 years down the road, the people who are living there don't get along, and the person living in that main house goes, oh, I'm just going to shut off your utilities and, up yours. Now you have a situation within that cluster house arrangement here where are those people who are now suffering as a result of this, do they have a conduit to City Hall to step in and correct this situation, or do they have to deal with it themselves? I'm curious how that is dealt with in other areas.
Yeah, again, it's going to depend on the model, and when we're talking about just a simple garden suite or a simple detached secondary unit, you can't sell it. So whoever owns the main unit will be usually renting, or people have said they'd like to live in it and rent out their main home, and that's the feedback that we've gotten. When if you're getting into a cluster home situation, you're going to be getting into the same situation with a townhouse development, an apartment building, anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
You probably have to deal with the strata council if it's stratified. The city has nothing to do with it. Councillor Thompson?
I just want to thank the gallery for their interest in this. We've had public hearings and no one showed up. So this is really nice. Thank you for coming.
Lorraine Dick, 92266. I just want to know if these two gentlemen have had their questions answered.
Well, actually, I'm feeling more frustrated than when I arrived. Because it seems to me, I am not a city planner, but reading this document is pretty Greek to me. I'm going to rely on City Council, and in particular, I guess, our planning department, to make a decision on these bylaws that is in the best interest of everyone. And once they've made that decision, then it just happens. If they want to put in a garden suite next to me, they do. I have no input because the bylaw's been passed, and it just sort of happens in our neighborhood. And it's going to happen in our neighborhood because we have one fellow who earns his living building homes, and he's already refurbished one house on 11th, built one house on 11th. He owns 2 lots on either side of me. He owns an old rental on 12th Street, which is my alley, a new house that he's just built, and another lot at the end of that street. And he earns his living this way, legitimately. However, the bylaw change is going to impact us, these 3 people, and the rest of the people in this neighborhood. There's just really no question. So I guess why I'm frustrated is this is my one and only opportunity to stress that I'm a little bit scared that we're just going to rely on the city planning department to carte blanche make decisions based on the bylaw, legitimately based on the bylaw, that could negatively impact our neighborhood. So that's sort of how I feel at the moment.
Thanks, Ms. Maria. I heard our city planner saying that originally the tiny houses had gone into a lot of different zones, and I noticed that the first time I read through it, but I thought I just heard him say that now they've scaled that back, so it's not in as many zones. I'm just wondering if that's true, which ones it's been removed from. And I'm looking at the zoning map here, and I'm seeing, I think that 11th Street is in, it's in a light pink, and there's like 4 different versions of light pink, so it's hard to see, but is it single and 2-family residential? Is that the zoning for 11th?
Mayor, yes, that's correct. It is R1, single and 2-family residential. That means that any one of those lots could have a duplex on it under current bylaws. Tiny homes on wheels are not considered accessory dwelling units until they're actually put on foundation and are no longer on wheels. So they're essentially removed from, except through temporary use, removed from use on all zones. They would still require a development permit to be placed. Mr. Skelton's concerns are, as I hear them, that there wouldn't be an opportunity for input or feedback on placement of a garden suite or a carriage home on a neighboring lot and the increase in density that could affect his and his neighbor's interests. And hearing that in the changes to the draft bylaws, we put that the development permit area applies to these residential zone properties, and it would have to go through council, and likewise the design criteria would be able to go through council and perhaps the design review board or something similar until people are comfortable with what these look like and what's an acceptable standard. You know, we definitely have heard the concerns and also the support, and seek to strike a balance with these.
So it's my understanding then, if it's coming before council for a development permit, that's an open public meeting, so then there would be a slight opportunity for the public to contribute their feedback when a development permit is applied for through council. Is that right?
Yeah. Good. And so what would be how would the notification be notified? How would that happen, that citizens would understand there's a bit of development permit?
It's not usually done by signage in the neighborhood where it's proposed. Usually that's the procedure that applies. There's a sign put out.
Okay.
So you have the opportunity to express yourself.
Okay. Well, that makes it feel personally a little better.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we can't stop progress, but at the same time, you know.
There's never the situation where you said that anybody can come along and put anything there.
Yeah.
You'll have to accept it. That doesn't happen. You had stated earlier that anybody can come along and build this there or put a unit there, and you have no say in it. That does not occur that way. You always have a say if there's something that's abnormal to the bylaw.
Well, I guess if the new bylaw is passed, I don't have a say.
Not according to the way it reads.
Right. So
you do have.
Oh.
Development. We just discussed it. The development.
Yeah.
Am I right, Mr. Watt? Until such a time there's non-conformity and there's a development permit being issued, you have a say.
Yeah. That's good.
Do you understand what I?
Well, I guess there's signage that it would be put on the lot for a period of time that neighbors out for a walk can see.
Yeah, public display, in other words.
Okay.
Just
and
like when you're rezoning.
Okay. And then at that point, anyone in the neighborhood could approach the planning department here and ask what's happening, and
and you get a clarification of what's happening, and if you feel you're not comfortable with it, then it would probably go before council then, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel better about that. Thank you.
Councillor Ross. And then the lady. I'm sorry.
You have to have it up on top so we can get a signal.
Just pull it back.
Right.
There you go.
Okay. We talk a lot about forming character in council, especially when we're talking about commercial development and how we want to maintain the integrity of the city and the optics of the city, and we want to improve it all the time. So I'm just assuming, Mr. Mayor, through you, that as we potential applications for these carriage house or cluster homes, pocket communities, in-law suites, garden suites, you know, the various forms that we're talking about, names for them, that there is going to be form and character, that is going to be important. Because I would assume that anybody who is putting one of those on their property also does not want to compromise the real estate value of their property should they have to sell it at some time. So would that be something that we would consider as well, form and character?
Yeah, well, conformity would probably be a good word for it too, that they like the lady in the front row, it stated, with the exterior appearance would be conforming to the actual residence. Obviously, that would be a very good aspect to look at. You wouldn't put something there that doesn't conform at all with the principal residence, just for your own benefit as the owner.
This looks better than the original.
Mr. Mayor, Betty Ann Mackay. We live somewhere, 7304 Riverside Drive. And I just wanted to say several times different businesses or whatever have wanted to come near where we live, and in every case somebody has come and said, do you object to them being there? So this would probably refer to the same type of thing. But they wanted to put a pub next door once, and there was a kid's place across the street, and there was a Mormon church, and in each case, and Whispers of Hope, they came and said, do you object? So I would think it would be the same thing.
Somebody else?
Can we get a response on that? And then, please, can I ask your indulgence just to hold
Sure.
on?
Just so very briefly, thank you, Ms. McKay. In many of those cases, there would be an issue where it's a different zone, where the use is different than what would be listed as core commercial. So for instance, a temporary use permit for a church or a community use in a business zone. When there's a rezoning, there's a higher level of public notification. With a development permit, it's usually lighter, a post on a sign, and then an item in the agenda for the general public. So generally development permits apply because it fits in the zone, but there's the certainty that council wants to have an overview on the form and character, on sustainability aspects and that kind of thing, and that's where the fairly limited opportunity for the public exists, but signage is a key part of the process.
Go ahead.
Muriel again. I see that there isn't much alarm being expressed here about this, which I'm really happy to see, because we need to densify our towns, the very least, to do with, we can't expand out because we're going out into the forest and the houses up there are probably going to burn down. And I'm just wondering what kind of plans there are to make this, the idea of densifying the city, point out to the residents what it's a good thing. I just hope that's going to happen, because if you just spring it on everybody, you know it's going to happen.
So, thank you. So, to clarify, these ideas were introduced in public consultations from 2007 to 2009 as part of our sustainable community plan, and smart growth, densification, walkable communities, using infilling existing infrastructure were all key elements of that proposal. Some of the language in the zoning bylaw hadn't caught up with those changes, and so we clarified a little bit in the official community plan, but strengthened the zoning bylaw a lot to enable that diversity and infill. Essentially, the key economic aspect of it is a low-density residential cannot pay for the replacement of its own infrastructure.
Because I know Graham and I both, for anybody else's interest, perhaps if they don't already know about it, but he and I both have on Facebook a what would you call it, a group that's Strong Towns?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I really encourage people to look into that, and it certainly talks about density and streets, and oh my God, it's amazing. Ideas mostly out of the States, but
through you, Mr. Mayor, to Graham, are we going with the 50% or 40% lot coverage in this zoning bylaw for the residential?
One second. So here I'll just pull up to your residential zone. 50% including parking requirements was, I think, what we had proposed.
Because we were debating on 40 or 50, so we're going with 50?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just looking at that. That's accessory buildings, lot coverage right here. So this is the change right here, is that off-street parking is in the requirement. And so if you have a higher density of number of dwellings on the property, your parking requirement goes up. And so if a single family dwelling requires 2, so this is something to consider and could be put in as an option for further council discussion.
Gentleman in front here.
Gene Cook, and I have a few comments I'd like to include in this. I don't hear any real consideration given for the people who don't want to be in a community that's predestined to be made up of a whole series of small houses. You know, there's a lot of people out there, they've specifically paid the price, paid the taxes to have a large lot with a large house on it. And if the bylaw is in place, even if you have public hearings, because the bylaw is in place, it lends an element, a base element that causes, you might have $1 million home built on a double lot, and there's not enough people around you to protest the possibility of carriage houses or strata houses or whatever, and suddenly your property is diminished in value because of the multiples of houses that are built. Along with that, what you're really talking about is more to do with strata. And as soon as you talk strata, nobody is mentioned, but stratas cost money. So in regard to what the cameraman said, usually what happens is a strata is formed and people pay $200-300 a month into the strata, and the strata hires a management company that then manages on behalf of the council of the strata on what happens with that property. So if you have a disagreement with your neighbor, you know, he's not looking after his half of the flower bed, not shoveling his half of the sidewalk, whatever it is, it goes to the strata, the management of the strata, and they in turn have to enforce the law. But there is an element of cost that's offsets what you might pay in additional, say, taxes for a larger lot. If you're paying $250 a month, you're paying $3,000 a year to support a strata that you may or may not agree with, but they make the decisions for you. So I'd be concerned about what you're doing. You may want to consider that in some areas of the city, but not in all areas of the city, because those that want to have a larger home or a larger lot should not be subjected to the diminishment of the value of their property because of this preconceived idea that we have to ultimately we have to densify every place where everyone lives. It's not necessarily a good thing for any area to not have a fair amount of diversification. And if you introduce these kind of bylaws, then you're going to get, you may get carriage houses, you may get the structures that it has nothing to do with rich people, poor people. Just the fact that if you wanted to have a large home on a large lot with a swimming pool, whatever it is you wanted, you should be able to do that. And if you can't, then you'll move to another city where you can. So I don't think you can carte blanche, change it all, and make that a possibility for every area of the city, because there are times when bylaws, once the bylaw is in place, there might not be enough people to turn out for a public hearing, and something is passed that really isn't wanted by the majority of the area. So in fairness to all, various areas of the city should be designated as to what's allowed and what's not allowed. And those that want larger places pay more property tax, and they're quite happy about that. They're willing to pay that price.
With all due respect to everyone in the gallery, do we have any other questions or concerns? Because we do have our regular meeting coming up, and should there be an exuberant amount of discussion still, we can adjourn this and have it at another time frame, unless we can wrap it up pretty soon, because we got about 4 minutes.
Just,
go ahead.
If it's okay, one quick question. Is this idea of Gloria Cook, where you live?
You want the rural address or the city address?
We're just out of the city.
Is that what they're asking?
Yeah, where do we live?
5955 Kenmore Road.
Is this policy carte blanche over the city, or are there designated areas that you have identified for this kind of thing? That's what. So, if you could answer that, that would be good. Please.
The areas that wouldn't allow it are currently Valley Heights and any other areas that have a building covenant that restrict development, and so developers have chosen to place those in areas like Riverside Meadows and Grayson Place and several other subdivisions over the years, and there's processes that govern those places.
So again, one more time, is there anyone else that has a question? Otherwise, I will declare this public hearing closed very shortly. Hearing none, I declare this public hearing closed.